There is a particular kind of silence that arrives uninvited. Not the comfortable silence of a Sunday morning, not the peaceful quiet of a forest walk, but something stranger, something colder, something that settles into the middle of your chest while everyone around you is laughing at a joke you understood perfectly well, but somehow couldn't bring yourself to find funny. You smiled anyway because that is what you do. You smiled, nodded, maybe even made a sound that resembled laughter, and for a brief second you watched yourself perform that gesture from somewhere slightly outside your own body, thinking, what is happening to me? That moment, that specific, quiet, almost imperceptible moment, is the one nobody talks about. Not your doctor, not your therapist, not the motivational content you've consumed for years, not the friends who love you genuinely, but who are also busy managing their own performances. Nobody tells you about the strange afternoon when the things that used to feel like home start feeling like a museum exhibit. You walk through rooms you've lived in for years, past objects that carry memories, through conversations that should matter, and something inside you has gone very, very still. Not sad, exactly. Not numb, exactly. Just still. Like a camera that keeps shooting but has somehow lost interest in the subject. You've probably tried to explain it to someone. Maybe you chose your words carefully, tried to describe the texture of it, the specific quality of this particular kind of distance, and watched their face shift into concern, into the look that says, I think you might need help. And maybe that look made you retreat immediately, made you say, no, I'm fine, I'm just tired, work has been heavy lately, I think I just need sleep. And then you went home and lay in the dark, wondering if they were right, wondering if this hollow, clear, slightly detached way of moving through the world is the first sign of something breaking inside you. It is a deeply unsettling thing to feel yourself go quiet in a world that rewards noise, to lose the appetite for the things that are supposed to make a human life feel worth living, the gatherings, the celebrations, the shared excitement over news and events and plans, without replacing them with anything obviously meaningful. Just this strange, clear, uncomfortable space where enthusiasm used to live. And here is where the self-accusation begins, because the mind is very efficient at turning confusion into judgment. You start to catalogue your own symptoms. You wonder if you have become depressed, because depression is something you've heard described, and some of what they describe sounds familiar, except the descriptions always include a heaviness, a darkness, a wanting to stay in bed, and what you feel is not exactly that. You still function, you still show up, you still complete the tasks, but you do them from behind a kind of glass, slightly separated from the urgency everyone else seems to feel. And because you cannot place the name of this thing on a label you recognize, you invent worse names for it. You wonder if you have become cold, if somewhere along the way you lost the capacity for genuine warmth, and now you are just simulating it, performing care without actually feeling it, moving through relationships like an actor who has forgotten why they wanted to be in the play. You watch yourself be kind and wonder if the kindness is real. You watch yourself help someone and notice you are monitoring your own emotions, looking for the reward, the warmth, the satisfaction, and finding something quieter than you expected, not absence, not emptiness, something more neutral, more clear, more difficult to name. And then comes the fear that perhaps this is arrogance, that you have read too many books or thought too many thoughts or spent too much time examining things, and now you are sitting slightly above your own life, looking down at it with a kind of detached intelligence that has eaten through the roots of ordinary joy, that you have outsmarted your own ability to be happy, that the analysis has replaced the experience, and now you are left with understanding without feeling, with perception without delight, with clarity without warmth. You know the word for that kind of person. You have met them. You always found them a little sad, a little lonely, a little too proud of their own suffering, and now you're afraid that you have become them. You lie awake at 3 in the morning running this loop, checking your own emotional temperature over and over, trying to remember the last time something made you genuinely, unreservedly, fully happy. Not the managed version, not the appreciated version, but the animal version, the version where the body moves before the mind has a chance to comment. Trying to remember who you were before you started watching yourself so carefully. And the harder you look, the more distant it feels, and the more distant it feels, the more convinced you become that something is wrong, that you are broken in a way that is very hard to fix, because it isn't dramatic, isn't acute, doesn't have clear edges. Just this persistent, pervasive, slightly eerie sense of having stepped back from your own life without quite being able to find the way back in. But here is what I want to say to you, and I want to say it without the language of self-help, without the brightness of motivational content, without the promise that understanding this will fix anything. What you are experiencing is not the beginning of a collapse. It is not evidence of damage. It is not the first symptom of a sickness that needs to be treated. What you are experiencing, with all its discomfort, all its strangeness, all its unsettling clarity, is the precise sensation of a mind outgrowing the container it was handed. That is not a metaphor I use lightly, and I am not going to dress it up in spiritual language or make it sound more mystical than it is. I mean something very specific and very structural. The mind, your mind, was given a set of instructions very early on. Not written instructions, not rules that were spoken aloud, but something more deeply embedded than that. A felt sense of what matters, what is worth wanting, what constitutes a good life, what kinds of pleasure and recognition and belonging a person should organize their days around. Those instructions came from everywhere at once, from the families you watched, the stories you were told, the rewards and punishments that shaped your behavior long before you were old enough to question them, the culture that surrounded you with images of what happiness looks like, and what failure looks like, and what a valuable human being looks like. And for years, probably for decades, you operated inside those instructions without ever quite noticing they were instructions. They just felt like reality. They felt like the shape of the world. And then, at some point, gradually, almost imperceptibly, without any single dramatic event to explain it, the instructions started to feel wrong. Not wrong in a way you could articulate at a dinner party or explain in a text message. Wrong in the way that a shoe feels wrong when your foot has grown past its size. Functional, still wearable, not causing crisis, but unmistakably, persistently, quietly wrong. The things you were told to want started feeling like they belonged to someone else's life. The markers of success, the social rewards, the emotional highs that were supposed to accompany the achievements, they came. You received them, and they tasted like almost the right thing, like a photograph of food, like the memory of warmth rather than warmth itself. And here is what happened. Your mind, without your permission, without your planning, without a self-help book or a spiritual teacher or a life-altering crisis to trigger it, began to see the mechanics. It began to notice the architecture, not dramatically, not in a flash of enlightenment, but in the quiet, persistent, undeniable way that you notice after a while that the magician is using their other hand. You start to see how the illusion is built, and once you see it, you cannot unsee it, not because you are special, not because you are more perceptive than other people, not because you have achieved some elevated state, but simply because the seeing has happened to you, the way things sometimes happen to people without being chosen or earned. That is the first thing worth understanding. The seeing is not an achievement. It is not something you did. It is something that happened to you, and it has come at a cost, and that cost is this: the things that worked before, the easy joys, the tribal excitements, the pleasure of shared outrage, the comfort of consensus, the warmth of being told you are good and right. Those things have lost their grip, not because they were bad, not because the people who still enjoy them are asleep or unevolving or wrong, but because for you right now, in this particular chapter of your particular life, the mechanism has been seen, and a seen mechanism cannot be fully inhabited the way an unseen one can. Think about what it means to watch a film when you understand how film is made. You can still enjoy it. You can still be moved. But there is a part of you that is always also watching the craft, noticing the editing, feeling the music placement, registering the performance technique. You are inside the experience and slightly outside it at the same time. Both things are true. And you don't wish you didn't understand. The understanding is its own kind of beauty, its own kind of pleasure. But you also know that the particular kind of unself-conscious immersion you had before you understood is no longer available to you. You traded it for something, and the trade was real, and there is genuine loss in it, and the loss is not a mistake. It is just the cost of the particular territory you are now in. The metaphor extends further than films. It extends all the way into the structure of daily life, into the way human societies are organized, into the deep grammar of belonging and meaning-making that holds communities together. There is an enormous amount of collective agreement underneath what we call ordinary life, an enormous amount of shared pretense, not malicious pretense, not conspiratorial pretense, but the ordinary, necessary, thoroughly human pretense that certain things matter because we have agreed they matter. Status, recognition, reputation, the specific performances of belonging to this tribe rather than that one, these are real. They have real effects. Real people organize real lives around them, and there is nothing false about the feelings they generate. But they are contingent. They depend on a kind of continuous collective investment that is only possible while you are fully inside the agreement. The moment you see the agreement as an agreement rather than as reality, the investment becomes optional in a way it wasn't before. And optional investments feel different from necessary ones, lighter somehow, less urgent, less capable of filling the space they used to fill. This is what has happened to you. Not that you have become superior, not that you have escaped the human condition. You have simply, through some combination of experience and reflection and time and perhaps pain, stepped far enough back from the theater to see the stage. And the stage is still beautiful, the performance is still real. The actors, the people you love, the people you are surrounded by, are not diminished by your seeing the stage. But you cannot forget that the stage is there, and forgetting was a kind of warmth you didn't know you were depending on until it was gone. There is a particular experience that happens to people who are crossing this threshold that almost everyone describes and almost nobody understands, and it is this, the sensation of being surrounded by people and feeling profoundly alone. Not lonely in the way that can be fixed by company, alone in a much more specific sense, alone in the sense that what you are moving through right now does not have a language in the conversations available to you. The people who love you most are not moving through it. The culture you are embedded in does not make room for it. The language available for talking about human experience, the language of psychology, of common sense, of popular spirituality, of productivity and growth and optimization, doesn't quite reach it. And so you carry it in silence, and the silence is heavy, and you wonder if the weight of it means something is wrong. It doesn't. The silence is not a symptom of failure. It is the natural atmosphere of a particular transition. The same way the space between breaths is not a failure of breathing. There are moments in human development, genuine developmental moments, not metaphorical ones, where the self must pause, where the old structures have loosened and the new ones have not yet formed, and the only honest thing to do is to wait in that space without forcing resolution. The mind trained by modern culture finds this unbearable. We have been so thoroughly shaped to fill every gap with content, to process every feeling into action, to convert every discomfort into a project of improvement, that the simple act of sitting in necessary uncertainty feels like negligence, feels like you are failing to manage yourself properly, feels like you should be doing something, reading something, changing something, fixing something. But the invitation here, and I use that word carefully because this is not a command, not a prescription, not a 10-step program, is to consider the possibility that the pause itself is the work, that the vague, hollow, slightly disorienting space you are living in right now is not empty waiting but full becoming, that what feels like absence is actually clearing, that the things draining away, the old excitements, the borrowed desires, the performed emotions, the automatic reactions, are draining away because they were never quite native to you, and something in your system finally has enough clarity and enough stability to let them go. There is a thing that happens to the skin of certain creatures. The old layer, the one that served perfectly well through a whole chapter of life, begins to separate. This is not visible from the outside. There is no dramatic event, no announced transition, just a quiet structural change happening underneath the surface, a slow loosening, a preparation. And for the creature inside it, if it could report its experience, it might describe something very much like what you are describing. A strange detachment from the familiar surface, a sense that things fit differently than they used to, a not quite comfort that doesn't respond to the usual remedies. And the solution, the only solution, is not to reattach the old skin, not to convince yourself that it still fits. The solution is to move through the loosening, to trust the preparation, and to wait for what comes next. The difficulty is that nobody can tell you exactly what comes next, because what comes next is particular to you, to your specific nervous system, your specific history, your specific set of unresolved experiences and unlived possibilities. What I can tell you is what tends to go, the frenetic quality of old pleasures, the dependency on external validation, the need for constant stimulation to feel alive, and what tends to arrive, a quieter, more durable, less spectacular version of all of those things, less like a wave and more like water, less like fireworks and more like light, less dependent on the specific performance of happiness, and more like the actual felt quality of being okay. Not ecstasy, not revelation, just here, steady, rooted in something that doesn't require constant feeding. But I need to pause here and say something that matters, because this kind of territory is dangerous in a particular way that is not often acknowledged. There is a version of everything I have just described that becomes its own trap, its own performance, its own elaborate avoidance. And that version looks like this. The person who has moved through some genuine awakening of perception and then quietly, slowly, almost invisibly, begins to use that awakening as a source of identity, as a hierarchy, as a quiet but persistent sense of having arrived somewhere that others have not yet reached, the intellectual pride that dresses itself in spiritual language, the coldness that calls itself clarity, the withdrawal that calls itself depth, the judgment that calls itself discernment. This is worth sitting with, honestly, because if you are the kind of person who is having the kind of experience I've been describing, you are almost certainly also the kind of person with enough intelligence and enough self-awareness to dress your less admirable impulses in very convincing clothes. The distance you feel from certain conversations is sometimes genuine recognition, and sometimes it is impatience. The flatness you feel at social gatherings is sometimes a natural consequence of transition, and sometimes it is contempt with better lighting. The quietness you have developed is sometimes real stillness, and sometimes it is superiority performing as serenity. The difference matters enormously, and it is a difference only you can actually assess, and only honestly. Because here is what the genuine version of this doesn't produce. It doesn't produce a person who finds other people exhausting and calls that spirituality. It doesn't produce a person who has stopped being moved by ordinary human things, by grief, by tenderness, by the specific beauty of a person trying their best in difficult circumstances, and calls that clarity. It doesn't produce a person who has less patience for vulnerability, less warmth for confusion, less gentleness for the people who are still very much inside the structures you have begun to see through. Seeing the stage does not make the actors less real. It does not make their struggles less meaningful. It does not give you the right or the reason to stand apart from them with a knowing look. Richard Feynman, whose name this reflection carries, was a man who understood this in a way worth describing carefully. He was one of the most rigorous, penetrating scientific minds of the 20th century. He could see through things. He could strip the pretense from ideas, the false certainty from fields, the comfortable approximations from theories. And he was also famously, delightedly, almost aggressively ordinary in his appetites. He played bongo drums in bars. He loved magic tricks and long conversations with strangers. He found the question of how a rubber band works as genuinely interesting as the question of how the universe began. He did not use his exceptional perception as a reason to disengage from life. He used it as a reason to be even more curious about everything, including the messy, unresolved, difficult, beautiful, irrational things that make a human life feel like a human life rather than a solved problem. That is the model, if you need one. Not the person who has seen through things and therefore holds themselves apart from them, but the person who has seen through things and is therefore free to engage with them more fully, more honestly, with less performance and less need for the engagement to mean something grand. Free to love without needing the love to be cosmic. Free to enjoy something simple without needing it to be a spiritual experience. Free to be present in an ordinary afternoon without needing the afternoon to justify itself. What you are moving toward is not brighter or more dramatic than what came before, but it is more accurate, more yours, less dependent on the agreement of others that this particular shade is worth wanting. The pleasures that come after this transition are quieter, less urgent, less capable of lifting you to the specific heights of the old performed joys, but they are more real, more continuous, more like a property of being alive rather than a reward for doing the right things. The joy, and I use the word carefully because I am not promising ecstasy, that exists on the other side of this dissolution is not the joy of having arrived. It is not the joy of having figured something out that others haven't. It is more like a quality of the air inside the chest, a kind of okayness that doesn't depend on the current circumstances being favorable, a capacity to be genuinely present in the moment without needing the moment to perform to specification. A willingness to be moved by small things, not because small things are secretly grand, but because being moved is itself a form of aliveness, and aliveness is what you have been slowly learning to trust again. The people in your life who feel far away right now, the relationships that feel strained, the conversations that feel effortful, some of those will recalibrate as you settle into this new ground. Not all of them. Some are genuinely oriented around the old you, more reliably enthusiastic, more easily available, more willing to invest energy in the maintenance of shared fictions. And it is not their fault, and it is not yours. You are simply in different places at a particular moment, and the connection that worked in one place needs to find a new form, or it will not survive. That is real loss, worth grieving honestly, rather than dressing it up in philosophical language, about people not being at your level. They are at their level. You are at yours. Levels are not the point. Honest connection is the point, and honest connection requires you to show up as what you actually are, rather than what you were. What you are right now is someone in the middle of something. Not at the end, not at the beginning. In the middle, where the light is strange and the footing is uncertain and the maps from before don't quite apply. In the middle, which is exactly where it is most tempting to declare a crisis. To reach for the nearest framework that can make the strangeness familiar again. The particular framework this moment needs is one you are building by moving through it. You cannot borrow someone else's, and you cannot hurry it with the right content or the right insight. You can, however, do something small and specific that tends to help, and it is this: tell the truth. Not out loud necessarily, not to any particular person, but inside yourself. The habit of noticing the difference between what you actually feel and what you think you are supposed to feel, between what you actually want and what you have been told to want, between the person you actually are in this moment and the person the old narrative requires you to be. Just the truth held quietly, without judgment, without needing it to resolve into anything immediately. Just, this is where I am. This is what is happening. This is real, even if it doesn't look the way I expected it to look. This is mine, even if it doesn't match the description. That truth, the quiet, specific, unheroic truth of where you actually are, is the ground, not the destination, not the answer, just the ground. And ground is enough. Ground is, in fact, everything, because without it all movement is just falling in a more elaborate way. You are not broken, you are not cold, you are not damaged by your own thinking or hollowed out by your own perception. You are not too much or too little, or the wrong kind of person for the life you are living. You are someone whose inner life has outgrown one of its containers, and the outgrowing is uncomfortable, and the discomfort is not a problem to be solved, but a process to be moved through. And you are, in ways you may not be fully able to register right now, moving through it, not dramatically, not visibly, not in ways that would make a satisfying story about transformation, but real, persistent, true. The feeling of being alive, the simple, quiet, slightly mundane feeling of being present in your own life, will return, not as euphoria, not as revelation, just as itself, just as this, the particular texture of this particular morning, the specific way the light moves through whatever window you are near, the small warmth of a real thought in a clear mind, the sense that you are here, that you are real, that this moment is enough, not transcendent, just true, just yours, just enough. That is what you are moving toward. Not more noise, just cleaner signal, not more intensity, just more accuracy, not a better story about who you are, just a clearer sense of what is actually there underneath all the stories, steady and quiet and entirely your own. Already there, already enough, just more visible now than it has ever been before.